following program is intended for mature audiences.
Booted Revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. It is September 24th, Wednesday. All right, so we're going to be talking about a few things today. Obviously, what's on everybody's lips today is the fact that President Donald Trump, the President of the United States, went to the UN in New York at the General Assembly and torched Europe, torched the UN, torched globalism in another successive round of Trump laying it out on the line that he will indeed engage against the leftist forces, corporate forces that are trying to build a global world order, global government through the UN. The other global government failed experiment of the United Nations, which began, of course, as the League of Nations, et cetera, et cetera. So, and also, we heard that Jimmy Kimmel is back. At least some people saw it. A lot of people didn't. The thing with Jimmy Kimmel is that it had nothing to do with censorship. The network, and as you'll see, many corporations understand the turning tide of culture. And so many businesses, because they want to see into the future, have their hand on the pulse of culture and see which way it goes. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. And a lot of times, the corporate fascists, the oligarchy, want to drive culture. So that's one of the important things to understand, is that they're devising culture in a way that suits their agenda. Instead of having to try to follow culture, they, devise culture, and then it fits into their scheme. And that's what we've been seeing. It's the same thing where you develop drugs or you develop cultural norms surrounding the poisoning of young people, the unintended hormone therapy that people get through microplastics and pesticides, etc. All right, so let's just get into the news really quickly. There is some other breaking news that we will cover, and that is that Google is repentant, apparently. Yes, as we've known for many years now, that Google and other social media companies, YouTube particularly, were censoring along with the government. They were asked to do it by the Biden administration, and now they vowed to let people back on their platform who had been banned for talking about the pandemic, talking about pharmaceuticals, and of course, talking about the rigged election. So I've noticed some things on my YouTube channel too, so you could go check it out if you like. Let's get to the news though. We're going to start with Reuters. Trump tells UN that climate change is greatest con job globally. Well, it is, but the reasoning is, I'm not saying that there isn't climate change or that it may not be man-made, but it's man-made for a different reason. But as I mentioned before, they developed, the powers that be, developed culture around this idea that man is poisoning the planet. Not even man, but you're poisoning the planet when you drive your car or when you don't recycle, all these other things. And other emerging economies are allowed to so-called pollute to their heart's content, but only the Western countries have to curtail energy use, etc., because of climate change. It is a sort of a con job. I'm not saying that climate change doesn't exist, but what we do know is that the agenda around climate change is a construct. Realistically, you driving your car to the supermarket or whatever doesn't affect climate change. We talked about CO2. It's not, and then people are confused between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, which is the big thing, and actually real pollutants in the environment that RFK Jr. talks about are more of a threat to humanity than the airborne gases, too much CO2, which is a naturally occurring gas. And people kept saying, well, if the levels get too high, well, the levels have been high in the past and it didn't do anything. And the world did not end in 10 years. As many as the young folk I know kept screeching about, the world's going to end in 10 years. Well, it's been 10 years, world didn't end. So just like Al Gore's assertions, they're wrong. Just the News is reporting a death blow to globalism. Trump's UN speech sets up a U.S. pivot. Trump went on to address what he perceived to be the failures of globalism and its myriad political projects, namely the Palestinian cause and international migration. Well, this is not, this story here dwells on the Palestinian state quite a bit. And I explained this the other day, that they're rushing to recognize a Palestinian state to ensure Gaza is part of that state because Israel is getting ready to annex Gaza. So the Palestinian state will only be the West Bank, but that's why people are rushing to do it now. I don't want to dwell too much here on the Palestinian state. What he talked about, which was important, was international migration. And that, of course, is strange because they're different precursors in the United States, North America, South America, Central America, than in Europe. They're different precursors, yet they're both occurring and being lauded along by the leftists, both in the EU and here in the Democratic Party. Also from NBC News, Trump says now he thinks Ukraine can win back all territory taken by Russia. The president posted on Truth Social after that he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly in New York that he was going to do all these things. This is just a pushback against Putin. The problem is that Putin, well, the Russians believe that Trump, because of their last negotiations, that Trump is compromised anyway, that he says one thing and then he'll do another. Like President Trump was supposed to get rid of sanctions in his last term against Russia, and instead he doubled them. So they don't really trust Trump either. So during the peace process, the Russians took the opportunity to advance their military cause and push even further into Ukraine and push their strikes even further. And then you have these violations of NATO airspace in several Eastern European countries by drones, and then most recently fighter jets. They're obviously pushing the envelope. I don't agree with that. I'm not a Russophile. I just said the Russians have a cause. People don't believe it. It's not. They're not trying to reconstitute the Soviet Union. They just perceive NATO as the enemy. So, and now that they've aligned themselves with China, this is going to be, what preceded this was bad diplomacy. This is what obviously is going to be a problem, because you're not going to be able to separate them that easily. That's the issue. You can't separate China. Now that China and Russia are together, you can't separate them that easily. I'm trying to get my feed going here. It's not really working, so I can't see myself. Moving on with the headlines, though. We have from Mediaite. Trump pulls a jaw-dropping 180, ruthlessly mocks paper tiger Russia in shocking post. We know that Russians now have come back and said there is no paper bear. They're not. Paper tiger is a reference to China. So it's not really, it's been used, that metaphor has been used many times, but it's really a reference to China. If you were going to say paper bear, and then the Russians said, well, there's no paper bear, so, go screw yourself. So, yeah, I don't know what's happening here. I am getting a new computer, so pretty soon that these little problems will probably go away. One American News is reporting Trump backs NATO allies downing Russian jets invading airspace as U.S. support would depend on the circumstances. So this is what Mediaite is talking about, the 180. It is a 180 because he was pursuing peace, which is the right thing to do. Anytime you go to war, you should exhaust all efforts at peace. So I don't want to go to war with Russia. I think we have to play this very carefully. But obviously, the sort of, I don't want to say appeasement, but doing the things Russia said to do and then not coming to the peace table was a wrong tactic. So now Trump is going to, instead of speaking softly, he's going to use the big stick. I'm worried about World War III. Obviously, everything is in flux now, and this is very disturbing because we want to be walking this back as much as possible. But obviously, you can't have Russian strikes going into NATO, and they know that too. They test the waters. Given this new opportunity, they're testing waters here. My feedback. So moving along with the news. Also, you might have heard of the case that at the UN, Trump tried to get on an escalator and the escalator stopped working. So his spokesperson, Carolyn Levitt, calls for the UN investigation into alleged escalator sabotage incident targeting Trump. And there was evidence that UN employees at the UN building there in New York City were talking online on social media about targeting Trump with some sort of malfeasance. Well, this is obviously it. Apparently also his mic was turned down during his address, and there were a couple other incidents. But right in front of all the press, shutting off the escalator there was obviously the most egregious. And, I agree. But the thing is, the globalist left, they're just not going to go away or come to the other side or whatever. They have invested in this plan, this globalist plan, and they're just hoping to weather the bump of Trump. But unfortunately, they see the culture, not just in the United States, but globally and in Europe, changing, becoming more conservative, more pro-sovereignty for the individual, as well as the nation state, etc. So morphing into this new global world order might not come as quick as its progenitors would like. All right, so Jimmy Kimmel. Reuters says Jimmy Kimmel defends free speech as he returns to late night television from a suspension. Reuters is MI6, so he defends free speech. He didn't apologize for what he said. He just went on there and defended free speech. And they look at it, and the left looks at it as some battle of free speech. It's not a battle of free speech. He's on a major network that's governed by the FCC, and that his ratings are failing. His viewership is down. He's not funny. He's really unhumorous, and that his whole shtick is Unfortunately, it's all geared to the college educators, the college educated, I heard it, so I know it kind of idea. And so their echo chamber there, which unfortunately is getting torn down. I shouldn't say unfortunately, I should say fortunately. The New York Post has the headline, "Defying Emotional Jimmy Kimmel returns to the airwaves as Trump bashes ABC for bringing not funny late night host back." He isn't funny, and this shtick, this bemoaning Trump and conservatives, and it's like it's a funny thing. And just like Hillary Clinton started in Trump's first election, in that campaign in 2016, that kind of like Trump supporters are this marginalized group, and they're all right wingers, and Republicans are racist and white supremacists and all this shit. And then you had Biden come in 2020, and he kind of brought that all back. And then you have this echo chamber of the media all defining the public discourse as this, that, and the other thing. The fact is that they're all lying and it's all wrong. Now you see this, what was bubbling, and that's the reason that the left always thinks words are violence, because the problem is the truth hurts. And the more the truth gets out, people want to be on the side of truth. It's just innate. And so now people are realizing, hey, this thing on the right, this conservative thing, whether it's MAGA or America First or TPUSA, this revival, which is probably the fourth Great Awakening or the fifth, depending on how you look at it. And so that's a good thing, because although I'm not a fan of organized religion, I think if you look at it as a spiritual awakening towards Christ or Christianity, if you like, but spirituality as a whole, because unfortunately, I'm a Christian, but unfortunately, Christians tend to put Christ at the center. And if you look at world history and the Messiah story throughout history, he might be in a line of messiahs, perhaps. The order of Melchizedek, right? So they're leaders, spiritual and worldly leaders that are righteous and are part of this order, to bring forth a more righteous culture, I suppose, or society, a more righteous world. And I'm not a proselytizer or a thumper. I'm certainly not a moralizer. But, knowing what's right is important. And then doing what's right is even more important. And talking about what's right is also important. It's an old Zarathustran or Zoroastrian saying about the god Ahura Mazda, is good thoughts, good speech, good action. And that carries through till today. And that was thousands of years before Christ. So let's move on to the smug Jimmy Kimmel. The Federalist has the headline, "Smug Jimmy Kimmel returns to late night more insufferable than ever." Indeed. They write in the lead, a week's vacation from his quote-unquote comedy show didn't make Jimmy Kimmel any funnier, less bitter, or more likable. In fact, the late-night host returned to Jimmy Kimmel Live Tuesday on fewer ABC local affiliate stations, sounding more partisan and petulant than ever. I'm going to get a little bit more into this there's an article from the National Review. Kimmel offered no apology for the lies he told about Charlie Kirk's assassination, comments that earned him an indefinite short-lived suspension from his corporate bosses. The poster child for Trump, derangement syndrome, thumbed his nose at the president and shook his fist at Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr for hinting that Kimmel's comments violated long-standing broadcast laws. They did indeed. The National Review has the headline, "Jimmy Kimmel not quite coming to a small screen near you." The reason being is, in addition to not being shown on Sinclair affiliates of ABC, the next Star affiliates will also not broadcast Kimmel's show tonight. That was last night. This means that in addition to not being over broadcast television in the bigger Sinclair markets like Washington, D.C., Seattle, and Portland, it will also not be seen in NextStar markets like Nashville, Tennessee, New Orleans, Louisiana, Salt Lake City, Utah, Hartford, Connecticut, and my state. In fact, when you add it up, Kimmel won't be airing in 66 markets last night. Boo-hoo. I don't like Jimmy Kimmel. Never liked Jimmy Kimmel. I didn't like him on The Man Show. I didn't think The Man Show was very funny. I never thought Jimmy Kimmel was funny. I never liked his shtick. This is self-effacing, kind of like retarded, libtard thing. I mean, back when he was on The Man Show, he was a little pudgier. He wasn't as svelte as he was now, so it kind of looked like a couch potato. I like Adam Carolla. You know, I appreciated The Man Show. I think it was a good idea. But it was completely unserious. And I like comedy. I'm a fan of comedy. But certain things have to be taken seriously, and why you would even address an assassination of Charlie Kirk on a comedy show doesn't make any sense. PJ Media, Bill Maher gets in a verbal fisticuffs with Rob Reiner over dialoguing with conservatives. And Rob Reiner, the petulant leftist, before you have an exchange, you have to agree on certain facts. This is just the postmodern Saul Alinsky nonsense. Don't engage in debate because you'll lose. Reiner told Maher during the podcast, this makes absolutely no sense. Of course, PJ Media goes on to say, one cannot have a conversation concerning different points of view if one already shares the same point of view. That's called an echo chamber, and that's what the left likes. And that's what globalists like. Like, you know, they talk about things and they develop a culture that echoes these things, and that everybody who dissents must be shut down. But Bill Maher goes on to say, no, you don't. You can't. Once you start down that road, you just have to talk to people. Maher fired back. I like Bill Maher. At least he's sensible. Some people aren't sensible. They don't use reason, and that's another tenet of postmodernism. It's like, you don't think too much. You can think about things, but only in a certain way. One American News, Oklahoma superintendent pushes plan to launch TPUSA chapters in all state high schools. How about that? That's a good idea. The problem is high schools in a conservative state or a conservative city, they don't need, a Young Republicans Club or Turning Point USA. I don't think the dialogue should be controlled by either one or other political side. I think when you get into political debate, what you need to do is you need to correctly and truthfully outline what the two sides represent. The conservatives do this, Republicans do this, and the Democrats and liberals do this as well. They just paper over the meaning of terms like conservative or liberal, and they don't tell you what it means to be left or right. You know, the people on the left think, oh, the people on the right are fascists and authoritarians and whatever. That's not true. And people on the right think that people on the left are just, who knows, lazy or whatever. The truth of the matter is the divide between right and left just has to do with how much money that the state, and I mean in the nation state, but you could use this on the state level as well, or your state, or even your municipality, how much the government spends of your tax dollars, how much the government taxes you and how much they spend on, social programs or roads or schools, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the debate. But I never see anybody talking about that. You know, I think Charlie Kirk leaned into this a little bit because he talked about small government. But he didn't talk the fact about liberal means liberal spending. Didn't always, but yesterday's, you know, the 18th century liberal was more libertarian. So libertarian today is the correct political terminology for somebody who wants less authoritarianism. So if you're against libertarianism, then you're for authoritarianism. And all authoritarianism means is more laws. So libertarianism means left laws, and then below libertarianism is anarchy. So it's less laws and then no laws. That's anarchy. And then, of course, totalitarianism is all laws coming from the head of state in total. Every aspect of your life is governed by a law. All right, TPUSA receives over 120,000 inquiries to start new chapters as revival sweeps across America. This is from the Post-Millennial. So according to TPUSA, we had around 60,000 inquiries post-Sunday. Now we have over 120,000 inquiries, even accounting for attrition and duplicates. We are on the cusp of having a TPUSA or Club America chapter in every high school and college campus in America. And it should be, especially in the colleges, simply because academia is overflowing with not just liberal, but communist, socialist indoctrination. Because to them, that's their truth. And it's not really fair. I think both sides should be represented. And I think the truth should be told about what politics means. It's the difference between how many laws you have and how much the state spends. Those are the only two things you should be debating in politics. Speaking of politics, not really. One American News, failed Trump assassin Ryan Routh found guilty on all charges, facing life in prison. And PJ Media reports courtroom chaos. Ryan Routh attempts suicide following Trump assassination conviction. So apparently Ryan Routh, who is insane. So he is typically he is the poster child for liberal mainstream mind control. So the mainstream media pushes out all this shit, and who knows who else he talked to or listened to, whatever, that got him to believe in all these crazy deep state sponsored ideas, and then tried to carry them out. He wanted to be a hero. And then, unfortunately, he has to find out the truth. So he tried to defend himself in this very important case. And the kudos to the court for not giving him any leeway in defending yourself. If you've ever heard of Colin Ferguson, he's the Long Island Railroad shooter, one of the first mass shooters. And he defended himself also during his court trial. And the thing is like, you are definitely under mind control if you think it's a good idea to defend yourself. You know why they defend themselves? Because the lawyers try to tell them that your ideas are crazy. I can't defend that. And that's why they get rid of their public defender. Because these ideas are so ingrained in their skull, to tell them, you know, anytime you try to break someone's delusion, it's very difficult, because then they grapple with the idea that what they believed and espoused and all the years that they've been following these crazy ideas, that they were crazy all that time. And so that's hard for them to wrap their head around. but it's true. So all these people, including Tyler Robinson, are filled with ideas that are wrong. Not only wrong, but obviously violent and extremist, which is the worst part. Because even if their ideas were right and they were violent, they'd be extremist. So America was built on debate. The fact that the postmodernists don't want to get involved in debate is un-American. Sorry to say. You're free to be whoever you are, but the way we resolve things in the United States is through debate. It's the way the government is set up. Postmillennial has the headline, even the Atlantic admits left-wing violence is on the rise. Data set that the outlet used includes the type of weapons used, the intended targets, a number of fatalities, and the ideology of the perpetrators. And you could see the headline right there, left-wing terrorism is on the rise. That is from the Atlantic. The Federalist also has the headline, bogus ADL report either mislabels leftist violence as right-wing or omits it entirely. The ADL's latest annual report claims that right-wing extremists have been connected to all identified extremist-related killings in 2022 and 2024. But the problem is they're wrong. Not everyone agrees the Anti-Defamation League countered with its latest annual report. Right, is countering things like the Atlantic are saying, this is the third year in a row that right-wing extremists have been connected to all identified extremist-related killings. I mean, it's all wrong. So that's how you see Ginos and Jews in name only, or the leftist Jews. I would say secular Jews. It's the same, it's in the family of the Trotskyites. Keep pushing this thing that right wing it's terrible, and as Joe Biden said, it's full of white supremacy and all this crazy stuff. It's anti-Semitic, when most of the anti-Zionist nonsense is coming from colored people on the left. Excuse me, people of color, Arabs, and their allies. I'm not a fan of Israel. And when I say that I'm not a fan of Israel, I'm not a fan of governments in general. So I'm not saying anything against the Jewish people. People are people, and I love people. Even though I've been known to say, hate people, love humanity, but Jewish folks are a part of humanity. They're good people and bad people. I never generalize about anybody, but I sure as shit can criticize nation states because of their government. So I have nothing against Russian people, and I'm no fan of the Russian government or the Ukrainian government or the German government or Emmanuel Macron or Starmer or, goes on and on. I just happen to be not a fan, but I happen to like where the United States government is currently, because we need kind of a reset from this globalist leftist scheme. It's a postmodern mind control nonsense that they've been working on for hundreds of years. I would like that all swept away, especially out of my government that I pay tax dollars to. But I definitely don't like the ADL because they're always banging that drum of extremism. And really, most of the extremism, as we know now, is on the left. Why? Because they don't have good ideas. And then, of course, when you fail in those and promoting those ideas, you get frustrated, and that's when you get violent. Of course, those 61 deaths in the ADL report only make a tiny fraction of the 58,000 some murders the FBI recorded over the same 3 years. Still, as Trump noted, a political murder is an attack on our entire nation. Yet none of these cases listed by the ADL involve a right-winger murdering a political target. And that's what you're talking about, political violence. And if you look at most of those cases, you're kind of splitting hairs. You know, because you said one thing on social media, you know, and I think a lot of these mind control things were set up anyway. I don't see it. The right just has a better political argument. They don't need violence. Why would you need violence? Anyway, big story. Just the news. YouTube said it's bringing back political hostage accounts. So, Missouri Representative Eric Burleson responds to the report that Google video arm YouTube is bringing back creator accounts previously banned for COVID-19 election misinformation to apply for reinstatement. Apply for reinstatement. Yeah, election misinformation. What exactly is that? Like I said, there's no... Information is information. It's how you use it that makes it misinformation. So it's election misinformation. So because you say that Joe Biden didn't get the most votes of any presidential candidate in history, is that misinformation? No, I think it's true. He's just wasn't that popular. And all the things we know about COVID-19, obviously. And to keep people's free speech, keep a lid on it because they're trying to get out information that the government isn't getting out. And it's fucking YouTube. So, I don't know why. I didn't understand the shadow banning and the censorship. You know, I just don't understand that from social media. I just didn't understand that. If you're going to go after misinformation or disinformation, it depends on the use. You need to go after sites that purport to show news information that cites that's fake. So my wife has shown me things from Facebook all the time. Look, it's Fox News, but the information, the headline isn't right. Fox News never put that out. And so they're showing a headline, but it's not really there. I mean, I don't include links here, but you could look up any headline here. I didn't construct these headlines. These are from the media outlets themselves. Like this one, Associated Press cheerleads for Mamdani, lies about his record. That's the Associated Press. Associated Press is a captured media outlet that is a mouthpiece of the global establishment that, like as I mentioned, is pushing this globalist agenda. It's a leftist agenda for sure, because they want UBI and global socialism for everybody, because there won't be any jobs because AI is taking over all the jobs. And you could blame Trump for no jobs, but that's not the reason. You could blame Trump for pushing AI, and that is indeed taking all the jobs. But that doesn't mean, even if you're a proponent for Western civilization, that doesn't mean the West is necessarily doing things that are good for you. I'm pushing AI. Now they make it an AI race with China. Okay, we have to exploit AI because China is using it. I mean, they did this during the Soviet Union. You know, they would give the Soviet Union technology and they go, look, the communists have this. We have to develop that too. And so they did it here as well. China has AI. So we both have to, if you create an AI arms race, then you're perpetuating the technology, whether it's good or bad. I don't necessarily agree with that. And the West has done other things like this next article from Fox News. Syria's new president takes center stage at the UN General Assembly as concerns linger over terrorist past. The fact is, we put in a jihadi, former ISIS member, former Al-Qaeda terrorist, you could say, militant, Islamic militant, to head up Syria, which is really a fractured mosaic of different tribal groups. And that what they were worried about was that the Islamicists will push Islam over the Alawites and the Christians and the Druze. Druze, not Jews, in Syria. And a lot of that is happening. They do have ethnic violence. But the fact is that this war on terror that I had to live through for decades and all the bullshit that people are talking about Islamic militants when we were actually behind the Islamic militants. And that our alliance with the former monarchy of Saudi Arabia and getting them to push Wahhabist ideology around the world, which spurs, with the madrasas teach these kids, then spurs violence towards the West. They just built another enemy in Islamic terrorism. Well, when Trump got in his first term, he helped engineer a coup to put MBS in it. Yeah, MBS. Mohammed bin Salman, I think it is. The crown, one of the crown princes over some of the other ones that wanted to continue exporting Wahhabism. So Trump got this guy in, and that's what the Adnan Khashoggi murder was all about. All right, moving on in the topics here. You might have heard that Kamala Harris has a new book out, 170 Days or whatever. And you see her interviews. Boy, she should have went to like Smart Camp for a year because, you know, she didn't write this book. You know, she probably talked with an author about it, and then he wrote down what she would say. Washington Examiner has the headline in the Harris book, Why the Petty Slurs and Slights. And they go on to say Harris, who might or might not be considering another run for president, of course she is, in 2028 seems determined to irritate some of the people whose help she might need in the years ahead. No, she's throwing people under the bus from the old liberal establishment because the moderates are not going to win an election. The only way Harris gets more political clout is to side again with the progressives, the extremists, the far left progressives, etc. And she found that while she was on the campaign trail, that those missives were the ones that got the most traction. You know, fighting against fascists and standing up for the rioters. And, you know, so the far left, more extremist talk, that's what got her traction. The conciliatory, moderate tone, because the only people they have left on the left are the extremists. So what they really need is more John Fetterman. But they don't want that. They're trying to look at the demographic and seeing, well, what the fuck are we going to do now? Well, let's go hard left. You know, and the thing, it's losing its luster, the whole anti-Trump thing. People are like, Trump ain't so bad. You know, it was all, you were feeding us a line of bullshit that Trump was this evil guy. And some of them, some moderate or apolitical folks snapped out of it. Others didn't. You know, the hard left people. You know, Trump is Hitler. Is he really? I mean, you know, and then they take everything that Trump does, you know, if it's authoritarian in nature, to, you know, put a bow on it. Look, ICE is rounding up. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, is enforcing immigration and customs. How dare they? And the Border Patrol is patrolling the border. More from Just the News. January 6th subcommittee zeroes in on paid informants at the Capitol riot. Dozens of paid federal informants present during the demonstrations and is concerned that the intelligence they gathered was not properly shared with law enforcement. One thing we have learned, and this came at the tail end of the Biden administration when their Department of Justice admitted they had many, I mean more than 2 dozen paid informants embedded in the crowd, said Barry Loudermilk, representative there, who's on the subcommittee. So we're right again. We were right then, we're right now. The left lies. Whenever we do a little scratching on the surface, the left, whatever the left say is always a lie. And what we've said, and I'm not saying Republicans or conservatives in general, but at least I have, is that all our suspicions were correct. And if the left even bothered to look at the video from January 6th with Antifa, anarchists, leftists, in their black bloc, all black clothing, dressing up as Trump supporters. And of course, you have Ray Epps. And then you have what seemed to be Antifa guys that didn't want to don Trump gear to blend in. They were in their black bloc, breaking windows into the Capitol, breaking windows. And even at one point, the crowd tried to stop them from breaking windows, which is obviously illegal. And we know they're named Antifa members were in the crowd. So not just intelligence, leftists and intelligence possibly working together. And they're of course, more than 24. And it's not just one agency. It wasn't just the FBI. And that's why they had to have the pipe bomb thing, because that allowed legally for military intelligence to get involved. So we got some good news coming up. I mean, obviously, the truth coming out about January 6th, Capitol riots. It's always great to have this information come out again. I can't go on and on and on enough about when the truth comes out, we're right. And when it comes out on the left, they're wrong, right? This guy, Tyler Robinson, he was not a MAGA supporter. He was a leftist. Maybe recently converted or radicalized. Like I said, the right are reactionaries. They're not radicals on the right. So you have to know how that works. That's the whole thing with progressive. Let's think of new ways to fuck things up. That's progressivism. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And then it's the reaction and the radical ideas of progressivism. And then it's the reactionaries on the right that push back with traditionalism. Anyway, Fox News has this headline: North Carolina lawmakers pass Arena's law, to eliminate cashless bail after Charlotte train stabbing. Arena's law heads the Democratic governor's desk after 82-30 state house vote. Good. Yeah, the soft on crime approach doesn't work. People that commit crimes should be incarcerated. Sure, they're allowed to put on a defense, but they don't need to be out on the street. Oh, they don't have money for bail, so they don't get, blah, blah, blah. They committed a crime, or they're accused of committed a crime. Them being out on the street doesn't give them anything. It's not like, oh, I need to huddle with my team of lawyers or whatever. They just go out on the street and they continue doing what they were doing. People that commit crimes need to go to jail. Now, if there's some doubt that it might not have been, you're just a suspect, and I know the way the law works, you're always a suspect until proven guilty. You're innocent until proven guilty. I understand all that. But the point is, depending on the evidence, you should be maybe allowed to get out on a reasonable bail, or maybe no bail if you're indigent, if there's some doubt that you weren't the perpetrator. But the point is, guys like this lunatic, and like I said before, prisons, which are usually run privately, should have facilities for mental patients. With all the care that they would need psychologically. They have to have some place to go. They just got rid of the sanitariums, and then the crazy people were just walking around the streets. And most of the people, I've done several documentaries and stories on homelessness. I've been out on the street with these people. Most, if I don't want to say all, it's a generalization. Most people that live on the street have mental illness, which is exacerbated by substance abuse. Usually substance abuse is a symptom of another issue. But you wouldn't have so many homeless people if you had some place for these mentally ill people to go or to have them sent, especially if they commit crimes. Speaking of crimes, lawfare, the Department of Homeland Security is unlawfully collecting DNA. This is a lie. The department's accelerated DNA collection program is a civil rights and civil liberties nightmare. Consent is not the cure. I agree. But the Supreme Court already ruled on this. And Antonin Scalia wrote the dissent. And you should go back and read Scalia's dissent on this issue. He articulated it very well. You shouldn't, especially if you're just a suspect. If you're a suspect of a crime, they collect your DNA. I don't believe that should happen. Nor should you be fingerprinted if you're a suspect. But that's the way. So they already fingerprint you, iris scan you. The problem is that I believe iris scan, fingerprint may be lawful. Collecting something from you, your cells, I think that's an invasion. So I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that the Supreme Court already ruled on this. So you might have not heard this story. New York Post, New York judge found credible evidence that Senator Ron Wyden, who is a senator, I believe, from Colorado, his kids relentlessly harassed wife's assistant before suicide. More leftism. So the kids are obviously entitled, and we'll get to the story here in just a second, but the gist is that his wife, who's a real estate person, had a personal assistant or executive assistant or whatever, who was a gay man, and the kids relentlessly harassed this assistant. And then when the assistant quit and tried to get unemployment, I guess, Wyden's wife tried to undermine that effort to get unemployment. And during this, the kids harassed him even more, and supposedly the guy killed himself. Let's look at the story here. A New York judge found credible evidence that the children of U.S. Senator Ron Wyden terrorized their mom's personal assistant with abhorrent homophobic slurs, including Little Zest Bunny, before his suicide documents show. Wyden's wife and kid's mom, Nancy Bass Wyden, who owns Big Apple's famed Strand bookstore, largely didn't object to the accusations of her former assistant, Brandon O'Brien, raised during their fight over unemployment benefits. So the guy's husband filed a wrongful death. Months earlier, when O'Brien had attempted to collect unemployment checks after he resigned from Bass Real Estate LLC in September 2024, Bass Wyden fought him on it, arguing that he shouldn't receive government assistance because he only left the job when he knew he was about to be fired for theft. It just shows that these these liberals aren't very liberal either. Be kind. They're not kind. They're just fucking assholes like everybody else. And their kids are even worse. So I'm not going to go into exactly what he said here. When O'Brien first started working for Bass Whiting, he complained that her daughter behaved and spoke sexually and inappropriately around him. And while the mom didn't remember the gripe, she recalled the children's male au pair leveling a similar complaint the judge found. So even the au pair was like, your kids are effing rude maniacs. Anybody who's got an au pair, of course the kids are spoiled little shits and are going to behave that way. So obviously they're not learning from their liberal father that you have to embrace homosexuality and all things on the left. So, but you're not allowed to harass people. But what's the recourse here against kids? And then another very big news here in the tech segment. Major League Baseball will use robot umpires in 2026. This is from the Associated Press. Robot umpires are getting called up to the big leagues next season. Major League Baseball's 11-man competition committee on Tuesday approved the use of automated ball strike systems in the major leagues. Don't get too excited yet. Human plate umpires will still call balls and strikes, but teams can challenge 2 calls per game and get additional appeals in extra innings. So it's like the instant replay review like you have in the NFL, that they can challenge a call and then you will basically go to the videotape or go to the AI and see what they called. I don't know why you have to have AI doing it. Why don't you just, go back to the instant replay? Maybe this will make the game, baseball games already